Well, for more insight on the Iran-US indirect negotiations, we're joined by the geopolitical analyst Alina Cara Beyer, live from Riyadh. Thank you so much for joining us today. So technical talks have begun in Doha without direct US-Iran meetings. Does this reflect progress or just continued mistrust?
Thank you for having me. I think it reflects still progress. We've seen some fighting on the weekend. Now there's more diplomacy. In general, there's always diplomacy behind the scenes. Yesterday, there was a spokesperson of Qatar. They gave a very interesting press conference, and they explained precisely how things are moving forward behind the scenes. Discussions are happening. Indeed, with the mediators, not between the US and Iran directly. Iran did not send a high-level delegation because they're angry that the frozen funds of $6 billion have not been released yet. And their understanding this should have happened right now. Now the memorandum of understanding is drafted in a way that each side can interpret it somewhat differently, and this is the work now of those mediators in Qatar to bridge those gaps. So I think it's definitely a progress.
And Iran is refusing direct talks with the United States and insists on mediation through Qatar. What does this indicate, though, about the current level of trust between Washington and Tehran?
Well, I think we've known that there will be problems, and that's what the mediators now have to work on. Work in something it's called real-time mediation process, and that means that as soon as a problem comes up, they are trying to find a solution just within that moment, and that is what's currently happening in Qatar in a very quiet way. And we know that there are at least 3 working groups in Doha tackling the technical discussions. The first one is tackling the nuclear problem. The other one is tackling diplomacy issues, and the third one is tackling the financing and returning of the frozen funds. For a start, those $6 billion. So that means there is a process, and I think we will see some frozen assets released in the upcoming days. And those negotiations in general, they will likely take place like all the other negotiations before. It's called shuttle diplomacy. It's a proven diplomatic instrument. It just means that the US delegation sits in one room and the Iranian people sit in the other room, and there will be one mediator or several mediators going from one side to another and just telling each side, the Iranians say this, what are you referring to when it comes to this issue? And then they will send a mediator back, and this goes back and forth for hours.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz, I should say, remains a key sticking point, particularly over Iran's proposal to charge transit fees. How significant is this issue for Gulf security and for Gulf states?
Yeah, I mean, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical choke points in the world. Normally, when there's no war, more than 10% of the world trade goes through this waterways. That means roughly 25% of world's maritime oil trades go through those waterways as well. And there was a study from yesterday, and that showed, and the study showed that the trade volumes still are very low. The volume fell from before war over 94% because ships are still avoiding the area due to the danger. We've seen some fighting came up just recently on the weekend, so the insurance companies don't want to cover the risk and the costs. And also Iran calls the strait its greatest instrument of power. So what they want to charge fees for what they call maritime services. So that means for security that vessels can pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The US, on the other hand, is opposed that idea, and also some Gulf states as well. They strongly disagree, and they view any kind of toll of the waterways as a strong violation of the international maritime laws. Saudi Arabia, for instance, has taken a very clear stance on that, opposing any fees. Oman, on the other hand, supports the Iranian idea that just recently came up with just other wordings, but kind of supported the Iranian idea to have some kind of fees on the passing of the Strait of Hormuz.
And Alina, from a Gulf perspective, how are countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar viewing these renewed negotiations? Are they optimistic about the process?
So the fact that the negotiations take place in Doha doesn't mean that Qatar is the only one who's mediating. I'm very sure that all six Gulf states, so the whole GCC, are working on that deal currently. We know that all of the six Gulf states welcomed the memorandum of understanding in general, signed between US and Iran on the 17th of June, so like, approximately 2 weeks ago. They just have this idea of hard-headed pragmatism. They are working on that just because they want to secure their future as well. The Strait of Hormuz is very important for them. Like I said, more than 10% of all the world trade goes through that strait, so they really want it open. That's the most important point for them. And in these negotiations, of course, Qatar is most active, but all the others want this agreement as well. Saudi Arabia, for instance, is also supportive, but they have a different approach. They say they really want to make clear that those talks include all issues that have hurt the region for decades, meaning like a full lasting deal, not just a quickly patch. Oman is very quiet. I'm sure you remember that the earlier rounds happened in Muscat, the earlier talks between Iran and the US, and they just handed over their own plan for the Strait of Hormuz. So Oman is kind of more in the middle, or even a little bit on the side of Iran, because they need to hold those close ties because they just share this very narrow point at the Strait of the Hormuz with each other. So I think they are hopeful and they are all working on it. And Gulf states are just very good negotiators, and they just really want to make deals.
And finally, Alina, the talks involved the release of frozen Iranian assets alongside broader security arrangements. Could these economic incentives help sustain the ceasefire framework?
So this is currently really the sticking point. It comes back to the memorandum of understanding. Iran is claiming now that the US is violating the agreement, the memorandum of understanding, because of their interpretation. I just mentioned earlier, they understood that the money of those $6 million should have been released by now, or at least in some way transferred to them. The US sees it or views it differently now. The negotiators in Doha try to bridge those gaps, but indeed, these frozen assets, they play an important role. They're very important for the Iranian economy. They are suffering a lot due to those sanctions, and restoring oil exports through the Strait of Hormuz and also accessing these frozen funds are a critical goal for them. It would help also the reformist leading officials in Tehran to demonstrate that diplomacy is really working, and that would make it more difficult for the hardliners in Tehran to derail the process. And also in general, I think from the US perspective, it's kind of easier to give Iran this carrot to just keep the Iranians on the table. So I think we will not see all the frozen assets released soon, but part of it, I'm really sure that within the next few days we will see released.
Alina, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it lots.